Okay, so this is a response to Escaping Atheism and to a response that they had made to the amazing Atheist. Now, by rights, this should have been a video response to Deas Esmay. But in one of those stories that I suppose you just couldn't fucking make up, Dean has decided in his infinite wisdom to undox himself and call himself Max Kolbe. Now, I don't know what's happened here, if he's watched some of the recent doxing videos that's taken place on YouTube and somehow got kind of like the wrong end of the stick as to what's going on there. But he's decided to stop using his real name, the name that we all know him by, and start calling himself Max Kolbe. Okay, so anytime you hear me talk about Max Kolbe in this video, that's the person I'm referring to. I'm referring to the YouTuber previously known as Deas Esmay. Now, one good point with regard to all of this is at least he's only changed his fucking name and he hasn't decided to change his preferred gender pronouns. So at least I haven't got that little complication to deal with. So before I get onto the meat and drink of this video, what I want to say is that I know that I will get some of the comments that I got last time, which is, what is the point talking to Max? Okay, because there's no way he's going to change his mind. Let me say right from the off, I know that Max is not going to change his mind. How do I know that Max is not going to change his mind? Well, there's two reasons. Let me show you what those two reasons are.
Nowadays, atheists define their position as lack of belief in God or gods. This definition itself is idiotic. By defining their position as lack of belief, that means that bricks, dust motes, and people in comas are atheists.
Jesus fucking Christ, Max. Apart from the fact that even if it is a psychological property, what the hell has that got to do with it? The truth value of whether or not a deity exists does not depend upon the definition of atheism. We use the terms like atheism and theism to describe the beliefs that you have and the beliefs that I have to make conversations easier. We don't evidence things through those definitions. All we're trying to do is to describe our states of mind. That's all we're trying to do, Max, right? But really what gets me about you making this argument is that I've already challenged this crap that you keep coming out with, that bricks are atheists, and I wouldn't mind, right, if you debunked what I'd said, or even if you hadn't debunked, but you tried to debunk, then I could understand you standing behind this half-arsed crap that bricks are atheists that you keep coming out with, but you didn't. Instead, you just ignored what I said and just keep spewing out this shit about bricks being atheists. Look, let me tackle it again for you, just so it leaves you in no doubt with regard to this. The fact that bricks are not atheists is nothing to do with the definition of atheism, which is a lack of belief in God. It's to do with the definition of atheist, which is a person. Personhood is important here, Max, who lacks a belief in God. And if you still are too fucked up in the mind to understand that one, look, would you accept that you are a Gentile, that you are a non-Jew? Right? I'm sure you would. Well, that puts you in the same category as bricks then, doesn't it, Max? Because fucking bricks aren't Jews either. But you and I, we're both sophisticated enough to know, right, that a Gentile is not just anything that isn't a Jew, it is a person who isn't a Jew. So how can you get it through your thick skull with regards to Jews and non-Jews, but you can't with regard to belief in God and a lack of belief in God? Explain that one to me. You know, the point is here that I know that this actually isn't because you don't understand the argument. It's because you're a disingenuous prick and you won't admit when you're wrong. If you get something wrong, you're not prepared to admit it, even though you make comments like this to me. Okay? Seriously, fuck you, mate. It's already predictable that even if I do bother to give you the detailed answer to your disingenuously question, maybe you should check what you're writing there, you will snort at the answer. So I know that you don't like it, Max. You don't like it, do you? If you engage with somebody in good faith, you make a good argument, and they're not prepared to accept that it's a good argument, and yet on the very video where you left that comment, this is what you had to say.
Because this is what we have to do, right? Like every time they insult you, you just have to stand and refuse to move, refuse ever to apologize, refuse to admit to any error, because atheists, because, so, you know, just like social justice warriors, any admission of failure or being wrongness will be used against you forever.
What a sad position to take, Max. That is, isn't it? That you're actually kind of crowing about that. You're quite brazen about that, as if it's a kind of good thing. That you won't admit that even if an atheist makes a good argument, proves you're wrong, you're not going to admit that you're wrong. And you know the really concerning thing? Because I see YouTube, I see exchanges like this as a chance to grow. I'm not really interested in you growing, but I am interested in me growing, Max, in actual fact. And I regard my 8 years as on YouTube as having been a process of growth, a process of learning about people such as people with religion and modifying my views. But here's the danger, Max. If you're not prepared to admit to other people that you're wrong, you run a very, very strong danger of not being prepared to admit to yourself when you're wrong. If you keep making erroneous arguments, if you keep reeling out the same old crap even when it's been shown to you that it's wrong, then you're in danger of still believing that crap and never being able to change. You're always being stuck in the same old loop. So the point is then, I'm not making these videos to try and change Max, but what I am doing is to try and debunk some of the crap that Max comes out with. Let me show you the argument that I really want to tackle in this video, because it's one, Max, that you have made again and again and again and again and again, and it's this crap that atheism is an ideology.
And which is, of course, his right to do. Atheists have every right to complain and attack and make ad-homs and slander and smear and lie about people and lie about religion and put forward their ideology. It's a little ridiculous that they keep claiming atheism is not an ideology and there's nothing ideological about atheism. And I think you will see that if you go and watch TJ Kirk's video, you will go and see how atheists literally do everything that we tell people that they do. It's amazing to watch TJ put himself through contortions, explaining his ideology and trying to explain why his ideology is not an ideology and why it's just the open-minded, rational position to take, and everybody else is wrong. They claim this lack of belief doesn't have any additional impact on other beliefs. Excuse me, I have a hard time. He's right. It's ludicrous. Okay, I'm sorry. They claim this lack of belief doesn't have any additional impact on other beliefs. This is false, as observing and questioning their other beliefs shows. In addition to believing that atheism is a lack of belief in God or gods, they also believe with high certainty that matter is all that exists, that theists, the religious, are delusional, irrational, brainwashed, or lying about their beliefs. Science is our most reasonable way of knowing truth because it often overturns itself. If God exists, human beings are intelligent, wise, and moral enough to pass judgment on God's actions and motives. It is appropriate to worry about the effects of religion on people, but there's no reason to worry about atheism. Morality has no objective basis, and some form of preference utilitarianism is the appropriate moral framework, and many others. It seems pretty obvious to us that these are not merely lacks of belief. They only make sense if the proposition God exists is false, which means that lack of belief is not what they believe. Someone who believes one thing and says another is either confused or a liar. Atheists are either confused or lying.
So this is an argument that you've come out with again and again, Max. It started to get a little bit tiresome. It seems that nearly every video that you make, you come up with this idea, this claim that atheism is an ideology, and you always seem to base it on this same reasoning. And if I can give this reasoning a more general form, it's something along the lines that if a belief places a restriction on you, then non-belief means that you do not have that restriction. And as not having that restriction is liable to impact upon how you think and act, that means that non-belief is an ideology. If you cannot see what's wrong with that, then let me throw another example back at you, Max. I'm sure you've come across this idea of yogic flying. It's kind of spurs off from transcendental meditation, and it's this idea that there's 3 stages to yogic flying. The first stage seemingly just consists of bouncing cross-legged on the floor, but if you can transcend the laws of physics apparently and get to the 3rd stage, then you can genuinely levitate. That is what believers in yogic flying believe, that if you get to the 3rd stage that you can levitate. Now, it would be a dereliction of my duties not to try and give this a bit of investigation, so I thought I'd have a go. Okay, no fucking about here, okay? I'm going to give this yogic flying a go. Straight to fucking stage 3. Bollocks to it. Straight to fucking stage 3. Here we go. I'm going to fucking fly. Rubber mat down. Okay. Here we go. No fucking about. Right, here we go. Bollocks. well, I failed, but at least I had a go, Max. At least I was there. And I gave it a go. I've got to be honest, I don't believe in yogic flying, and I'm quite certain that if I discussed this with you, you'd say to me, no, it's. I don't even know why you're bringing this up now, because I don't believe in yogic flying either. But you'd be a little bit of a tinker there, wouldn't you, to suggest that that's all that it is, because you and I both know that if you believe that you can levitate off the ground, that is significantly going to alter your worldview, isn't it? Because it says a lot about how you view the laws of physics, the law of gravitation. It's going to say a lot about how you view the human mind and the powers of the human mind over the material world. So not believing in yogic flying is going to impact severely on your worldview relative to somebody who believes in yogic flying. So according to the way you view these things, Max, your non-belief in yogic flying is a lot more than you make it out to be. Your non-belief in yogic flying, Max, is a fucking ideology. It's just that you're not prepared to admit to it. And so here's the point, Max, and it applies to non-belief in yogic flying or non-belief in belief in a deity. Equally here is that the beliefs you have don't stem from your non-belief in yogic flying or your non-belief in a deity. How absurd it would be, Max, if I was to say to you, why do you hold the views on the laws of physics and the laws of gravity that you do? Why do you hold the views on the way the mind operates that you do? And you said to me, well, obviously it's because of my non-belief in yogic flying. Of course it fucking isn't. And this is the problem, Max, is that it's not atheism that leads to these things, Max. In fact, it's not theism that leads to these things either. It's the very specific set of restrictions that come with your particular religion. And what you're doing is you're viewing atheism through the lens of the self-imposed restrictions of your religion. And then you're saying, whether you realise this or not, Max, something along the lines of, well, when these restrictions are not there, people are acting in the kind of ways that you would expect them to act if they didn't have these restrictions. And yes, that is true, Max. But that doesn't make not having any given set of arbitrary restrictions an ideology. I mean, just think, Max, just humour me for a minute and think what that would mean if that was true, right? If not having any arbitrary set of arbitrary restrictions was an ideology, there are millions of things that you do not believe in, Max. In fact, there's an infinite number of things that you don't believe in that could potentially affect your worldview if you believed in them. So the fact, according to you, that you don't believe in them is affecting your worldview. So according to your reasoning, Max, you are holding an infinite number of ideologies. How is that a helpful starting position to go from? Right, to start labelling things as ideologies on the grounds that you don't believe them, and not believing this arbitrary thing is affecting your worldview. It doesn't make any sense, does it, Max? And the only reason that anybody would give your argument any time whatsoever is because of this special privileged status that we grant religion. Why? Because of the ubiquity of religion in our society. Really kind of blinds us to it. It's certainly blinding you to it, Max. It's meaning that you're making an argument that you wouldn't accept. You just regard it as absolute drivel if it was made over anything else. But because your religion has got such a foothold in society that you're granting that argument some credence where it wouldn't be granted otherwise. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is, Max, and this is something that you always do every time, don't you? You give these list of things which necessarily inevitably follow from atheism, although even you don't make that claim because you know that that's obviously immediately bullshit, because when you ask people these questions, they don't always give you the answers that you want them to give, do you, Max? So even you have to admit that it's just a kind of tendency amongst atheists to hold these positions. So it's a pretty weak source on its face. Right, but even if you can find a couple of things that necessarily result from atheism, that still doesn't make them fundamental to atheism. And that is a very, very important differentiation that you're not making, Max. And to kind of explain to you the significance of that, consider the example of evolutionary spandrels, right? Now, I'm sure you understand the conceptualization of an evolutionary spandrel, but I'm sure there are some people watching who don't. It's a term called by Stephen Jay Gould, and the reason he chose spandrels, what a spandrel is, it's that little triangular gap, right? If you think of an arch in a church building, a church or a cathedral, you think of an arch, that little triangular gap at the top, which could either results from the space between the arch and the enclosure it's in, or the space between two arches, right? And if you was to try and look at the way that spandrels have changed and evolved over the centuries, and you were to do that in terms of looking at spandrels and spandrel design, you'd kind of be barking up the wrong tree. Because the pressure on church design and cathedral design hasn't been on the spandrel, it's been on the arch, it's been on the construction. We've understood more how to make a stronger arch, and so the shape of our arches has changed. We've also understood what is a more aesthetically pleasing arch, and so we've altered the shape of our arches. Spandrels may follow necessarily. They're unavoidable if you have arches, but they're not intrinsic to building an arch. They're not fundamentally part of an arch, and that is the difference there. Now, the example that Stephen Jay Gould gave, the analogy that he gave to draw it into the evolutionary realm, is a really interesting one. Some of you will have heard it before, some of you won't. It's very relevant to this understanding of atheism as Max is portraying it. So let me just run you through it. He suggests that the chin is the equivalent of an evolutionary spandrel, that it hasn't been selected for, that it kind of results. It's resulted as a result of other things which have been selected for, that have had selection pressures on them. Now, there are several different competing theories as to exactly how that's come about. Let me furnish you with one of them, which is that there is a selection pressure probably on all the great apes, which is to greater intelligence. And that what's differentiated us relative to the other great apes is that the shackles were removed, and the shackles that hold that in abeyance, if you like. And what are those shackles? The shackles are the necessity for a large jaw with a large crushing force, which results from the kind of diet that great apes have. And so what happened is that we had the ability to process food, right? Whether that's mashing food up or whether it's understanding, just crossing that threshold, that kind of Rubicon, and understanding how to create fire, which meant that we could cook food, which meant that we were pre-processing food before we started to masticate it as what would usually be the first process of digestion. And as a result of that, it took the shackles off the skull, because that large jaw and that large musculature meant large muscle attachments which exist in all the other great apes, and you need a very, very strong cranium to have those large muscle attachments and those large forces. Right, so what it meant that our craniums could start to get bigger and start to get thinner without them being pulled to pieces whenever we chewed down on something particularly tough. Okay, so that's the theory, and as a result of that, our jaw shrunk. You can see it if you look at my teeth. The fact that they don't fit in my lower jawbone very well is part of the evidence that our jaws have shrunk, if you needed that evidence. But not all of our lower jawbone shrunk. We've ended up with a chin that none of the other great apes have. Now, here's the difference between the chin and all the other bits. You've got all these other components, haven't you? You've got the selection pressure on a larger brain. You've got the selection pressure on large musculature of the jaw. You've got an increasing size to a cranium. You've got an increasing size to the brain and increasing intellectual capacity. You've got a thinning of the jaw. You've got smaller muscle attachments. You've got smaller muscles and muscular forces. You've got a smaller jawbone. Okay, and you've got the pre-processing of the food. You remove any one of those things, Max, from that theory that I've just outlined to you, and it falls to pieces. Every single one of them is intrinsic and necessary in that hypothesis that I've made, but a chin is not. You can remove the chin from the story, and the story still follows in exactly the same way. The hypothesis still works out in exactly the same way. So even though a chin may result necessarily from those changes, it is not intrinsic and fundamental to it in the same way that all of those other things are. And in exactly the same way, Max, even if you can find something, being nice, being nasty, not basing your morality on what God tells you to do, not believing in heaven or hell, not being a dualist, whatever it is that you can find that you believe arises necessarily from atheism, I've got to tell you, Max, it's a rising spandrel-like. It is not fundamental to what atheism is about itself. And it's a damn good job that we have that kind of reasoning, Max, because if we weren't, just think of the kind of things that I could throw to you as being intrinsic to your deity. You're telling me that the God that you believe in is atemporal, is aspatial, is transcendental, right, is omniscient, is omnipotent, is omnibenevolent, is this beautiful, supreme, unchanging being. And yet at the same time, this being simply cannot abide the thought that apes are wanking in their bedrooms, Max. Now, what would you feel if I said to you that intrinsic and necessary quality of this God of yours is not liking apes wanking in their bedrooms? It may well be that follows, that distaste for wanking apes follows necessarily and unavoidably from these other characteristics, but that doesn't make it a fundamental characteristic of your God. Do you understand what I'm saying now, Max? When I couch it in those terms, of course you do, because you know, you sly fucker, you've understood all of this right from the start, but it's just like you said in that video clip, isn't it? You're not going to admit when you're wrong, because this isn't about being a right or wrong, is it? It's about winning. So fuck you, Max. To everybody else, thank you for watching this video, and bye for now.